Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce, the Ukraine War Frontline update for the 15th of July 2023. Before we go to the front line, let's just have a look at some general analyses. The head of Estonian military intelligence, Margot Grosberg, has said that the Ukrainian forces are getting closer to a, quote, significant success. So speaking at its regular Friday press briefing at the Ministry of Defense in Tallinn, it talks about the tactics used by the Ukrainian forces to destroy the command post and logistics center of the Russian armed forces with precision strikes, a success in areas bordering Bakhmut, and the descriptions of the Russian general, which gave an idea of the end of Russian reserves. All this shows that the Ukrainians are close to a success of a larger sort. Ukrainian armed forces current preparatory attacks are aimed at concentrating on Russian units in narrow sections and finding weak points where breakthroughs can be made. To the same end, the Russian army transport hubs and logistics points and command centers in the rear are under attack, he went on. He discussed how Ukrainian units have been able to capture key areas in the north and south of the city of Bakhmut, giving them ability to direct artillery fire at the city, which itself is in the hands of the Russian troops, and to gain control of the roads leading to the city. This has caused resupply problems for the Russians located there. In addition, the presence of Russian airborne troops who have been in Bakhmut since the spring and are therefore still tied up in the city and suffering losses without scope of withdrawing them is also exerting a major impact, considering airborne forces are generally the Russians military's elite with a higher morale, aggression, etc., than many other troops. Their motivation will nonetheless eventually be sapped. Grosberg added, quote, "There should be more success at some point." So in the southern fronts, they've increased their occupied zones and are destroying important targets in the region with precision strikes. Now, this is the idea that it's about grinding the Russians down to a point where they can then do this attack. I keep talking about this. Some kind of breakthrough will be made, but at the moment there is sort of I wouldn't say a stalemate. I think that's an unfair statement, but they're in a phase of still grinding out the Russian defense. Kenneth Gregg, the Finnish fighter in the area, says the fronts have been stagnant for 24 hours, no gains here or there, except in Bakhmut area. At Oleshki, which is near the Antonivsky Bridge on the river Dnipro, the Russians have tried to drive us away from our foothold to the other side of Dnipro, but didn't succeed. At Pyatikhatki and Robotne, we have secured and retaken areas and regrouped. Things will probably start happening there again within 24 hours. Southwest of Ridnopil, we've advanced a few hundred meters. Otherwise, it's still quite quiet there. At Adiivka, the Russians have seemed to lose their appetite after yesterday's repelling of a big attack and lost a lot of material because of our drones. South of Klishchiivka, they have now abandoned the last big ridge. We are probably now executing a rotation, so there probably won't be any major things happening there in the next 2 days. Other fronts, same as before. So that's the kind of general analysis from those two sources. If we come to the northeast sector and have a look at the map, my map here, Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna, we have a blue line representing the Russian defenses as according to Andrew Perpetua, the mapper. Red line, Russian defenses as according to pro-Russian mapper Suryak Maps. And a white line is where it all was on the 30th of May, so before the counteroffensive started. And you can see the movement there. Now, there are differences in the mappers. There's been a bit of rejigging here in this area. I don't know that it's Ukrainian gains, but the pro-Russian mapper Suryak Maps has the Russian defensive line being pushed back near Persho Travneve. Again, I think that's probably just rejigging with some further information coming in rather than the Ukrainian attack. There's a lot of talk about this area of Novoselivska near Kuzumivka to the northwest of Svatova. We'll go to the ISW, American military think tank, Institute for the Study of War. So Russian forces conducted unsuccessful offensive operations east of Nevska and Terny, we'll come on to look at them, and Novosadovo, and west of Dobrova. That's according to the Ukrainian General Staff. Russian Mill blogger claimed that on the July the 13th, the Russian forces continued successful ground attacks near Torska and partially controlled the settlement. We'll come down to there. And there is attacking and positions in Serebyansky Forest. Okay. Some Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces captured Novoselivska and on July the 13th after Ukrainian forces withdrew from the settlement, although other mill bloggers claim that Russian forces are continuing offensive operations to capture the settlement as of July the 14th. ISW has not seen any confirmation that has been taken. So Novoselivska is this little town on the western side of the railway line. The Ukrainians have lost area around here, both to the north and south of Novoselivska, and the Russians have taken control, possibly of the first road or so, to the west of the railway line. And the claim was a couple of days ago that the Russians actually overran it and took it. If you look at Rebar, pro-Russian source, fierce fighting for Novoselivska continues. The enemy is moving additional reserves to the village, trying to hold key heights. So I don't think that the Russians have control over Novoselivska. I think that's wishful thinking, but it is tough for the Ukrainians around this area, as the Russians are putting pressure on all up and down this Luhansk front line. And then as we come down to the south of there is activity to the east of Nevska, as mentioned, and Terny, and possibly around Torska. So Torska is this town where the Russians claim that they had taken control of it, partially due to Ukrainian units putting a video out supposedly to show that Russians were being hit with Ukrainian artillery in the area of Torski. Then that video was taken down. People are claiming it was actually Ukrainians being targeted by the Russians. Lots of various claims. Russian mappers then had lots of Torska under control of the Russians. That's been stepped back, and again, Syriac Maps has rejigged their map, I think, again to show that the Russians really don't have that much control, if any, of Torska. In fact, there's no Russian control in the area of Torska there, although other claims will disagree with that. And I think we're left, with this idea that that the Russians are putting pressure in the general area, but didn't go as far as that video implied. And it's just trying to work out what exactly that video was showing. But as you can see here from Poulet Vallon, broadly based on Andrew Perpetua's mapping, the Russians are attacking nearer Nevska to the north and Terny here, as well as southwards from that salient, and they have made some gains in the Zherebiansky forest here. So that if we come out of there a little bit, there are gains just over here, and that's according to Syriac Maps and actually Andrew Perpetua's mapping, sorry. So the line did come down. Well, you can see the white line. That was broadly where it was. You can see these gains here. These gains were also, down along the Seversky Donetsk river, meandering through the forest. So the Russians have made some gains in that area, and we'll wait to see what exactly is the situation around Torska. As you can see, Andrew Perpetua is still saying that the lines, updated. He did a live stream last night, and there's no acceptance that the Russians control any of this area there. Although, it could be grey zone, they could be pushing there. That's the difference between kind of control. You might have troops there attacking, doesn't mean you necessarily control that area. And then it seems to be quite quiet along this Versk front. I mean, it's not quiet, but there's no news really coming out of the area there. If we go to the ISW, the Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Nevska and Bilohorivka, as well as other unspecified areas in the Svatova direction. So this Bilohorivka. There's another one down there as well, but this Bilohorivka, the Ukrainians attacking near there. There's sort of to and fro up there quite consistently. So that is taking place at the moment. As we come down to the Bakhmut area, the north, there is supposedly quite a bit of activity around there, or there was yesterday. There were some claims that there was a big attack by the Ukrainians in the Solidar direction. So if you remember, you've got Yakovlivka here, Rozdalivka, and Krasnopolivka. And just south of there, we've got Solidar, this kind of longer settlement with the salt mines that there was so much fighting over. And then this road north and railway north coming through Krasnopolivka. Now, there has been possibly quite a big game for the Ukrainians yesterday, going south from Rozdalivka towards Novoselivska. If we come on to the Bakhmut grouping here, we have no reports saying, here it is. So the Ukrainians managed to take control of the larger area after a successful assault towards Yakovlivka earlier. To the east, the Ukrainians advanced south of the pond, and to the west through the fields Krasnopolivka, Mykolaiivka, and Sakoyi-Vansetti will be in danger of encirclement. So you can see that they have, or no reports has a much larger advance for the Ukrainians than is represented on my map. So going down really here in this area um, towards Solidar. So really, we might see tomorrow the Ukrainian salient much further to the south there, and saying that that would leave Sakiv-Vansetti, Mykolaiivka, and Krasnopolivka under danger of being encircled, as the Ukrainians will be. In fact, let's do a little bit of scribbling because that's uh, always fun. So if the Ukrainians are going to come down here, if that's kind of where they are at the moment, you can see that you've got this whole area there then being under pressure from the Ukrainians. So that is happening. As we come on further to the south, let's first go to some general claims actually about Bakhmut. In the Bakhmut region, the initiative is completely under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine, says one of their spokespeople there. And then we'll go to the ISW to say that Ukrainian forces achieved partial success to the south. Cherevati reported that Ukrainian forces are advancing near Bakhmut itself and maintaining the initiative around Bakhmut. Though there is no talk about the Solidar direction really, in the way that no reports has talked about in any of what ISW says. Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces conducted attacks near Klishchivka and near Berkivka. Russian mill bloggers claiming on the 13th that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks from the Klishchivka heights. That's 2 days ago now, so I think they are in a lot of trouble there. The canal and dam near Kurdyumivka and near Yahidne. So the Russians claiming they are repelling. Let's have a look at the Russians' claim. Here's rebar from yesterday saying, north of Bakhmut, units of the Russian airborne troops launched a counterattack near the Bakivka reservoir, so not mentioning Solidar at all. As a result, tactically important positions were taken in the forested areas near the reservoir. So that is to say that in Bakivka, in this area near the reservoir, forested areas there, one assumes, I mean, there are a number of sort of larger tree lines. Generally, the tree lines are obliterated these days. When you see them like this, artillery has done their job, and you won't even know that there are trees. It's not even that there are tree stumps in these places. You see some of the pictures we've seen of trench fighting where you see these sort of thin tree trunks sitting up but wood stripped. Actually, a lot of these tree lines you don't even see that anymore. They're just basically obliterated down to mud. And the claims from Rebar that the Russians had some success around this area. They have pushed the Ukrainians back. There's been a bit of ebbing and flowing in the Bakivka area over the last week or so. So Rebar then continues to the south. Heavy fighting continues in Klishchivka, where the enemy has again stepped up attacks on the heights near the village. Russian troops are holding their positions, but the situation here remains quite tense. I think that's to accept that actually the Ukrainians have gained a lot of positions around that area. And then it goes on way to the south, southern front line there. So we come back to the ISW. Actually, no, we'll go to look at my map. So as we zoom out a little bit, we come to look at the center of Bakhmut, or Bakhmut city itself. Not heard too much there about the situation around there, though the Ukrainians appear to have gained more and more areas just around the edges of Bakhmut. And indeed, here, Syriac Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, suggests that the Ukrainians have gained this sort of area of fields just around these southwestern dachas there. I don't know if that's rejigging or whether that is an attack by the Ukrainians to take that. That would fit in line with the general idea of where they are in Klishchivka. If you look at Syriac Maps here, I just think Syriac Maps is just wrong here. There's no other way of putting it. There's no way that the Russians control the entirety of the heights around Klishchivka, which is what their map still indicates. It's just not the case. So we have footage to suggest that the Ukrainians are indeed on these heights above here. There's lots of combat footage coming out from Klishchivka and Zaporizhia at the moment. If you want to go looking for footage of stuff that's going on, I won't show it because I get demonetized. I mean, 3 out of my last 5 videos have been hit. So yeah, I'll be careful what I show, I guess. But if we look to the southwest of Klishchiivka, there has been both mappers agree. In fact, all three mappers. So the yellow line now is deep state maps as well. They are only mapping. Well, they have a supposedly a 48 to 72 hour operational security delay on their mapping, and yet all three maps have shown over the last few days that this area to the east of the canal is now under Ukrainian control, or at least the Russians have been pushed back there. Although the Surat map still has a little bit more of Russian control up here, but it looks like there's been some serious gains. Now, importantly, this fortification here is apparently now under, although Surat maps doesn't agree. Andrew Perpetua was talking about this in his live stream. This fortification doesn't look like anything there. These are 2018 maps that Google Map has on their browser-based um, provision. This fortification is under Ukrainian control, and that is really significant because that allowed the Russians to stop this advance towards Andriivka. I think now you will start seeing maybe Andriivka really being under a lot more pressure as the Ukrainians are able to get past that fortification that's now under their control, and then they can start sort of encircling Klishchiivka. The idea might be that they are waiting for the Russians to pull out of Klishchiivka rather than fighting through it, but I don't know. Someone was saying that actually, although this is on the heights here, it's not that easy to fight downhill. In the same way, it's not easy to fight uphill. Okay, there are different, if you're running downhill, you've tried running downhill. Goodness me, I've got MS, I can't run anywhere. But running downhill is actually more difficult than you think, and so it presents its own challenges. So just to sit up here, hammering the Russians might be preferable for the Ukrainians. So you might not see them advance until preferable for the Ukrainians. Might not see the Ukrainians advance until the Russians basically pull out. Now, there was lots of smoke activity around here yesterday. I was saying that could it be representative of a retreat from Klishchiivka, or it could just be covering up a maneuver. I don't know. It could be that actually Klishchiivka was being reinforced by Russians. I don't know. I've not heard anything about that, but there was a lot of smoke being used around. It looked like the back of Klishchiivka. So if we go to null reports here, the Ukrainians are starting to push south of Klishchiivka towards Andriivka. So this is that area I was talking about where the canal has been. This area has been liberated by the Ukrainians, and they could well be pushing towards Andriivka. In fact, that's exactly what null reports is suggesting here. And they managed to get a bigger grey zone in the black outlined area. Fighting was reported yesterday. So actually that is much closer to Andriivka than my map would suggest, meaning that the Ukrainians are about to encircle Klishchiivka, added the topographical map. So this is really useful to see this. So you can see the heights around here, but they can also move along the heights that envelop the southern part of Klishchiivka. So they're pushing towards Andriivka, but could also drive a wedge here between the two and really cause some trouble for the people, for the Russians still in Klishchiivka. So that is to move along these heights here. It appears that they are fighting around here, as according to no reports, and could be moving to take control of this area of land so that it's untenable for the Russians to remain in at least the southern parts of Klishchiivka. So I think the Russians being in Klishchiivka it's just a matter of time. And then I think Andriivka will come under some serious pressure too. So we are seeing some fairly decent success for the Ukrainians. It is grinding, it is difficult. This is fighting trench to trench and building to building. So this is potentially expensive for the Ukrainian forces. You're going to hope that they are getting a lot of support from things like HIMARS and precision artillery. But yes, certainly the Russians are losing some ground in the area. Now, here looks like, talking about precision munitions, it looks like a JDAM strike on Russian positions. Another JDAM strike. This is in Kupiansk-Kreminna, which is to the north. Interestingly, a lot of alleged JDAM footage is emerging from the same sort of area. I find this very, very interesting. So that is north around Krasnohora. My goodness me. Right, having just flipped to that video, we've just got an earful. I think I'm deaf now. Right, let's try and play that video quietly. serene sound of silence, and a massive JDAM explosion. You can see the shock wave coming out of that as well is pretty significant. So that has been. I'm really sorry about that noise there. Yes, I know I can mute my tabs. All right. Okay, so let's put that in, see exactly where that hit on my map. I know I'm flipping back to the north of Bakhmut, but this is where it is. So JDAM is, yeah, being used in this area. So we zoom out, they're obviously hitting some significant positions there. I've been wondering why they don't just hammer. Uh, and I know this Ukraine might not want to just destroy their own towns and villages, but I don't think you've got any choice here. I don't know why they don't just hammer Klishivka with JDAMs. If they can release JDAMs up there, and they are doing so up there, I don't know why they aren't doing it in Klishivka, or whether it is. So when you look at hitting somewhere like here, actually that's far enough away from Ukrainian positions that if you got uh, if it goes wrong to the tune of, I don't know, 3 kilometers, then you're still fine. The Ukrainians aren't there. Whereas if you're going to hit Klishchivka, your CEP, if you like, your error margins are much less because actually you've got your Ukrainian troops right next to that. So if your JDAM is goes a kilometer off, you're blowing up your own troops. So that could be why JDAMs are not being used in Klishivka. Because otherwise, I would just advocate blitzing Klishivka. I mean, that's what the Russians do themselves, isn't it? But if you've got JDAMs and you've got a place holding out, then I don't see why you don't use it. Anyway, coming on down south from Bakhmut, we come to Avdiivka. I don't have too much information on Avdiivka itself. I haven't even got a tab up. If we go to Poulet-Volon's map, we can see that, yep, Bakhmut, again, that's the area we are talking about there. Klishchivka, south of Klishchivka, and then towards Kurdimivka and Ozerynivka still further to the south along that canal. As I've talked about previously, we have an indication here that the Russians are still pressuring north out of Opitny and Vodyany and have had some success around here near Pisky and Pervomaisky. I'm not too sure about that. I don't know if that's rejigging. This is Andrew Perpetua. And Andrew Perpetua is talking about every time the Russians bring out footage to kind of indicate that they've succeeded or them blowing up something, it is actually showing them 300 meters back from when they previously were. So what we've seen happen continuously over time is that the fighting was out around Pervomaisky here, and then here, and then here, and then here, and then here. And the Russians have just been pushed back, even though they're supposedly attacking. It was around this area that we had that Russian get out of a tank without any clothes on, or try and strip his clothes off naked. So maybe he's covered in like hot oil or something. I don't know. But I showed you that. I can't remember. That was somewhere around here, I think. But the Russians are under a lot of pressure, and they're almost back to Pisky itself, which, this is then you're not too far away from your 2014 line here. So they are really struggling around that area, although potential gains, just this kind of area there, I think that could just be rejigging the map from Andrew Perpetua, because it doesn't fit in with the narrative he's been saying there. Now, the Russians have lost a lot of equipment in this northern area, and possibly 100 men in a couple of assaults. That was sort of 3 or 4 days ago now, but it's just some of the details are coming out from that. Kenneth Gregg talked about a repelled attack that cost them a lot in the last 24 hours. I don't know anything about that. If we go to the ISW Institute for the Study of War, they say Russian forces claimed on the 13th that Ukrainian forces I'm going to come to that. That's really, in fact, I'm going to leave that. So, Ukrainian spokesperson reported that Russians continue to focus their offensive operations in the Avdiivka and Marinka direction. So the Russians are trying hard there still, attacking Krasnohorivka, Severny. You get both in this area. So you hear the Ukrainians are repelling attacks, and then you hear the Russians are repelling attacks. So Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Krasnohorivka and Severny, uh, which is there, Severny. But we heard yesterday that the Russians are attacking north from Opitny towards Severny and have taken some area there. So there are attacks, counterattacks. Both sides are attacking, often on the same day, and it's quite difficult to work out exactly what's going on. So anyway, coming out from Avdiivka, coming further to the south past Staromerkylivka and then towards Marinka, there is activity still in Marinka. I find this quite interesting that Chechen Republic head Ramzan Kadyrov claimed on the 13th that Chechen Akhmat forces are transferring from Marinka to an unspecified, more difficult area on the front line. I mean, I heard that they didn't like it in Marinka because it was too difficult, the Chechens. So they appear to be everywhere, the Chechens. They are everywhere, but doing very little. Anyway, there are some gains for the Ukrainians possibly here, as according to Syriac maps, which is quite interesting. So this was an area where the Ukrainians were under a lot of pressure from vehicle-borne IEDs and the Russians making gains and gains. We've got this area there, which is a fortification area that the Russians took recently, and as they advanced further to the west. But interestingly, in VISW, we have Russian sources claiming on the 13th, so that's 2 days ago, that Ukrainian forces hold a previously Russian-occupied Zverinets area southeast of Marinka, and that is that area. So that although Andrew Perpetua has that not under Russian control, Syriac Maps does have it under Russian control, and it seems that the Russians themselves are claiming that actually the Ukrainians hold that, and that's significant because that is a fortified area that will present a much more difficult target to overcome. So for the Ukrainians to be in control of that is good news for the Ukrainians around there. Okay, as we come down south past Solodka, past Vuhledar, we don't hear too much news about that. We're coming about that area. We're coming down to the southern axis now. So we're going to come along past Novodonetsk to the Velika Novosilka sector, where we have a lot of pressure on Uruzhaini, just here, and Staromyolska there, as well as Pryutne. So they're banging on the door of Pryutne still. There still isn't too much activity, as in there's a lot of activity, not too much movement in terms of front lines around there. No, that's Robotna, so Poulet-Volon doesn't even have a map for that. I don't have any tabs for that particular area, but we'll talk about it from ISW. Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces broke through Russian defensive lines north of Pryutne along the Hrysheva Gully and are attacking along the Pryutne-Staromyolska line. Although that has been claimed, for days now, and they claim that Ukrainian forces are trying to break through Russian lines near Uruzhaini. So again, no details of what's going on there. That doesn't mean there isn't movement. There is an awful lot of operational security, but just to say that, yeah, there's activity around Pryutne still and towards this whole front line towards Staromyolska and then around the corner in the Uruzhaini area. Right, if we come to the west, I showed you some video footage of Halaipale this morning of how that, as a town that's near the front line, has been obviously consistently near the front line for an awful long time. It is somewhat like the early stages of Bakhmut, as in it's you wouldn't want to live there, and won't be too many people living there. A lot of destroyed buildings in that city. So there was some success for the Russians in northern Mariupol yesterday. Haven't heard anything particularly from around there. Activity around Drozhnyanka, and then we come down to Novopokrovka here and Robotna. So let's see what Reba have to say. So in the southern sector, back to where we just been, Uruzhaini, Novodonetsk, the Ukrainians attempted to shift the vector of attacks, carrying out several unsuccessful attacks in those directions. At the same time, intensive fighting continues in the area of Staromyolska and Pryutne. The enemy is attacking from various directions, trying to squeeze through the Russian defensive lines. And then we come on to pressure on the Russian troops' positions near Robotna. Continues acting in small groups. The enemy tried several times during the day to reach the outskirts of the village without success. So Robotna here, the claim is that, and the claim was some time ago, that the Ukrainians were one field away from Robotna. That still seems to be the claim. Ukrainian National Guard Colonel Urshalovich noted the Ukrainian forces are conducting offensive actions in the Melitopol direction, which is this kind of area, advance over 1,700 meters in the south and southeast of an unspecified location. So somewhere they've advanced 1,700 meters in this area towards Melitopol. So that could be either in the Zerebianki, Pyatikhatki area, or indeed in this Robotna area, although quite often they call this the Tokmak direction, and this one in the Vasilivka area, the Melitopol direction. So who knows exactly. Russian Melboroka claimed that Ukrainian forces advanced towards Robotna and were within 1 kilometer. Well, they were one field away, like 4 or 5 days ago, of the outskirts of the settlement. And other Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces are continuing attacks towards there. The Russian MOD emphasized the heaviest battles in the sector occur near Robotna during the night. Okay, I gave you some general hints as to what's going on in this Zaporizhia southern front line. Big piece of news is the claim that Ukraine are now firing 2.5 times more shells than Russia in the south. So 2 days ago, the spokesperson from the Southern Front shared those details. In total, the enemy attacked our positions 19 times with 595 shells, and the Ukrainians, on the other hand, fired 1,397 fire missions during the day. So there is a change in the tide in this great big, the god of war artillery. In these big artillery duels, it looks like the situation is now favoring the Ukrainians, and that's really significant. Now, it might take time. We've taken 6 weeks, but this is where we're at now after 6 weeks, which is this, I think, is what's really happened over the last 6 weeks, which you've seen a degradation of the Russian artillery pieces. You've seen a hit of the logistics in terms of both the trucks delivering the ammunition and the ammunition depots themselves. You are seeing, with the destruction of a lot of this kit, the taking out of experienced crewmen for the artillery, you are degrading the Russian ability to fire shells. And that degrades their ability to defend, which then leaves the Ukrainians in a better position to do these proper big attacks that I'm sure will be coming over the next few weeks. Khodorkovsky, a Russian military man, pretty much agrees. Once again, I would like to note our low level of counter battery ability. Our losses yesterday are not from small arms bar, but from fragments. In other words, shrapnel from artillery. Enemy crews do not change positions for hours, shelling with impunity our front line, and we're not able to suppress them. As I've written more than once, our gun artillery does not meet modern requirements for a number of reasons, primarily in terms of range. So the Ukrainians can fire, 40-kilometer range with their provided artillery pieces. So let's put that. So if you're in Robotna, the Ukrainians can have their artillery all the way back there, right? And some. That's 37 kilometers. So you can, it's just insane distances compared to what the Russians have, which is sort of 25-kilometer ranges. And that, if they're trying to hit the Ukrainians, they have to be sort of around that distance and possibly actually closer than that, because they will have worn out barrels. They'll be far more inaccurate, and the range goes. So it could be that really you've got, and some of their smaller pieces of kit will only have the ability to fire. Sorry, I keep pressing the wrong thing there. Will only be able to fire probably that kind of distance, less than 20 kilometers, so 18 kilometers there. And then within that range, of course, the Ukrainians can hit them with impunity. They can fire their shells without the risk of having counter battery fire, because A, the counter battery fire is not there, and B, that doesn't have the range to hit it. On the other hand, so it says Lancets are useful, but for every Lancet, he goes on to say, for every Lancet success that you see filmed, there'll be loads that don't hit, or that do hit and don't cause damage. And as I noted this morning, that's the advantage of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have way more drone capacity than the Russians, with the amount of fundraising that's happened. And then you've got Evil Gherkin saying the same kind of stuff, saying that actually the Ukrainians are gnawing away, as he says, at the Russian lines, and the Russian lines do not have the reserves. So it says they're operating at best at 70%. Forces, 70% of their forces, or the units have 70% of their personnel in them, and in some places a lot less, significantly less, he says. So as the Ukrainians are gnawing away, he says this means that if urgent measures are not taken, the enemy unfortunately has a chance of gnawing through our defense in Zaporizhia, and it will be very difficult to stop them. And no Surovikin line, which is still in a pretty deep rear, will stop the enemy if it's not taken by trained, properly equipped and experienced troops. In other words, you've got empty trench lines that have the reserves have been called up to the first line of defense. As soon as you gnaw through that, there's nothing left. If these troops die in the field, there will be no one to stop the enemy. And the main question now, will the enemy be able to gnaw through our defense in 2 to 3 weeks, exchanging their soldiers for ours, or not? Or will he exhaust himself earlier? And that is a big question, and he's pretty worried about that. So as we look at this, Syriac maps accepts that there are some Ukrainian gains around there, but it's still still somewhat behind what Andrew Perpetua thinks anyway. There are other mappers that show that the Ukrainians have moved slightly further forward to the south of Piatichatki, and that the Russian lines have been pushed further back. Sort of the indication would be that it's kind of like that there. The up here is where the Russian trench line is, and that definitely appears to have been overtaken by the Ukrainians, as according to sort of most sources. And around these kind of areas, I showed you this video this morning. This is a convoy of artillery. So talking about artillery, bringing in reserve artillery to replace destroyed artillery, and then that convoy getting taken out, and multiple pieces of artillery and vehicles and resources and ammunition being taken out with a big HIMARS strike on that convoy. So the Russians are really taking a logistical beating in this whole area. And as you can see here, the Ukrainians are pressuring around Robotna in a number of places and to the south of Novopokrovka. They are taking their own losses. An attack, a Ukrainian mechanized attack here around this area south of Novopokrovka was repelled, and the Ukrainians did lose a bunch of equipment. Likewise, they are losing equipment in a number of places around Robotna as well, but that's what you would expect during offensive operations. Then you've got activity around Piatichatki and Zerebianki, where there is continued pressure on the Russians there. But I don't know, there's too much to report about that. And then as we come to the Antonivsky Bridge, I mean, there are, it's just, there are different claims. There are claims that the Ukrainians are making some gains around the Zerebianki. In fact, there is, I'm sure there was one map I've got of Zerebianki being half under the control of the Ukrainians. Indeed, is that in this one? Yeah, so Zerebianki on this one. This is another global war monitor map. Zerebianki there is grey zone in half of the village, and that's as I mentioned, the lines further to the south there under a lot of pressure from the Ukrainians, the Russian defensive line being pushed back a little bit. So anyway, moving from there to over here, we have Antonivsky Bridge and the Dnipro River. Not a lot really to report there, although there are some claims from Ukrainian sources that the armed forces are preparing for an offensive, the Ukrainian armed forces in that area, which is interesting for them to telegraph that and tell the Russians that they are developing forces for an offensive. I don't know if that is something that is of a psyops nature or a kind of double bluff, and claim that there's further control along the Dnipro River Delta, kind of in this area onwards. So the Russians or the Ukrainians expanding their control on this kind of island area. We know that they are to the south of the Conca River, just there. This is the Conca River coming along here. I haven't heard of them pushing further along there, and I haven't heard anything about activity in the Dacha area. So we'll kind of wait and see. The ISW says that Russian sources claim that Russian forces destroyed several Ukrainian boats near the area, and this situation near the bridge otherwise remains unchanged. Anyway, that's today's update. Really appreciate you bearing with me. I tried to do a super quick one to see if I could do a really quick update yesterday. I recorded it. I was hoping it would be 5 minutes. It took me 11 minutes, and I was speaking at 1,000 miles an hour and could give you absolutely no detail about what was going on. It's just like, this has changed, that's changed, that's changed, that's changed. And it was just 11 minutes. And so I didn't release it because some people have been asking me to do quicker ones. I'm sorry, I'm just not very quick at this. But anyway, that's a 40-minute update. Sorry. Take care. Speak soon.